Hello, everyone. My name is Marlene Velasquez. I'm here at the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center. We're actually located in beautiful Rancho Palos Verdes in sunny Southern California. um, the Retreat Center welcomes all who arise. We've been here for many years. Right now, we're going through a difficult time. As you all know, everyone's being hit with coronavirus, and we are not able to have any retreats. So having you here on Zoom, and we thank Herb for donating all the profits of these retreats to the retreat center because it helps us stay afloat. So if you guys want to donate, you're more than welcome to do so at maryjoseph.org. Any little helps. And like we said, we want to thank Herb. Thank you, Herb, for doing this retreats. It benefits the people here and it benefits us. So your generosity is greatly appreciated. So with that, I'd like to introduce Herb. Many of you know Herb. Many of you are probably new. But let me tell you a little bit about Herb. His journey includes 7 years in Claration Seminary. He's a graduate in, he has graduate education in psychology. He has 40 years in human resources consulting. He has a certification as a spiritual director. He's 36 years of active participation in the 12-step fellowship. And he has published 3 books of spiritual awakening. I'm sure many of you have his books. And he also facilitates the bi-weekly practicing of centering prayer here at the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center. And his wonderful, beautiful late wife was actually the director here at the Retreat Center. So that's how we all tie in. We're one tight-knit community here. So without further ado, Mr. Herb Kagan.
Thank you so much, everybody. I've got such a wonderful team supporting me. My name is Herb, and I am definitely an alcoholic. Welcome to this first in the series of monthly exploration of each of the steps. We call it the path to freedom because that's the overarching purpose of the 12 steps. I'm going to ask you to join me in prayer, the Serenity Prayer. I'm not going to assume that everybody knows it. In fact, I'm going to make an effort to begin the use of the, there we go, the PowerPoint, and then I'll come back and connect to the PowerPoint in a minute. But pay attention to the Serenity Prayer. It's such a gift to us in these days where we have this tension in the world created by lots of competing influences. And this is a prayer to attempt to acknowledge that I need to know what I can influence. Notice I did not use the word control. I don't believe we control anything outside of ourselves or inside of ourselves. I've jettisoned the word control. I don't use it anymore. Long time ago, I used the word influence. What can I influence outside of me? What can I influence inside of me? And I need wisdom in order to navigate reality. And that's what this prayer is about. This is a journey to freedom. And I hope these monthly workshops will help you navigate this path to freedom. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. Out loud, quiet, not at all, as a positive affirmation or as a prayer to be present. Prayer is not about words, it's about the intention. We get caught up in the words because we're human and we like the easier, softer way. This is about being conscious. This is about being present. This is about having an intention. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, we're here to begin our journey of 12-step spirituality. A good friend of mine who died several years ago, but he had 50 years of sobriety. He was just one of those old timers that you went to meetings to listen to because they had such wisdom and such humor. And Frank would say, there's only two sides to the 12-step program. There are two sides to the 12-step program: the spiritual side and the outside. I hope you can hear that. I hear people talk about the spiritual side of the 12-step program. The whole program is about the journey to a relationship with spirit. Of course, step one begins that journey. That's where we are today. Looking at step one. Most everybody understands powerlessness. You hear it oft said in a meeting, powerless over people, places, and things. It doesn't make any sense, quite frankly, but it's repeated because it sounds good, it feels good, and people don't give it much thought. We're here to give a lot of thought to what does powerless mean. Bill says we're in the bondage of self. You can see that from the cartoon from a New Yorker magazine that I saw about 40 years ago. There's a second cartoon that I'll show you later on. But this is how many of us felt or are feeling today as a result of our addiction. Or many of us have come here because although our addiction is contained, we have abstinence, fairly regular, good, solid, basically, or maybe some really good, solid, periodic abstinence, whatever your dysfunction is, your addiction is. But you're restless, irritable, and discontent. You're not happy. You have a sense of emptiness. You have a darkness in you that you've attempted to deal with religion or with therapy or with human development or with a good relationship. And none of it has really helped. And you've been in a 12-step program, maybe consistently or maybe in and out. And it's just, it helped somewhat, especially if you're continuously abstinent. But there's still this deep yearning, this deep sense that something's missing. Doctor's opinion says I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. So now I'm going to invite you to participate. This is a workshop. I'll do a lot of talking between now and the time we close. Toward the end of the time we're together, we'll have some dialogue about your questions and your concerns. I won't be asking for questions until toward the end. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But right now, I want you to reflect on a question, a simple question. Why are you here? In the warm up to being here, we had the mic open and several people talked about hearing it from a friend or reading the flyer or having some connection to me in the past. Thousands of people know about this workshop today. And yet here we are, 100, 200 people. It's wonderful that you're here. But why did you come? What is your purpose? What did you hear that connected you to wanting to spend this time on a Saturday morning? And write out what your purpose is. I was asked that on a retreat at the beginning of my journey. I had gone to the retreat because I was addicted to self-help. This was before I ever came in the program. And I went there because it was about another activity. to help me expand my consciousness or whatever the game was 40 years ago. But I actually didn't know why I went. And the retreat master asked that question, and it just startled me. It woke me up. Oh, yeah. I'm giving up a 3-day weekend in order to be here. I better be really clear on what my purpose is, what my hope is, what my expectation is. I'll be talking now for the next hour, at least. This isn't a rehearsed, I don't have a script. I have notes and I have a PowerPoint that will guide me. But I want to fly over the Grand Canyon. If you read about it in a book, it's kind of like being in a 747. If you actually engage a sponsor or step guide, it's like taking a pack mule down the Grand Canyon. This is kind of a compromised position. In between that, we're in a Piper Cub, and we're going to fly over the Grand Canyon, and we're going to see that it's a deep hole and that there's some water down there and there's some erosion all over the place, and it's beautiful. But we won't see all of the detail, and we won't have necessarily all of the information, and we certainly won't necessarily have all of the experience that's available. But we're going to get a context. We're going to have a roadmap for each of the steps as we go through them on a monthly basis. One of the techniques that I learned early on in the hospital program that my wife was in for her alcoholism. She passed away 3 years ago. We were married 52 years. She had the courage in February of 1984 to go into a treatment center for her alcoholism. And I was willing to go to support her, and they asked me to ask myself a question. Looking back on that, I can see that that was a definite, effective pedagogy, a method of teaching, a method of learning, to ask yourself the question, and then to get some information, and then to take some action. I got some information from the therapy that was available in that program. I got some information from the teachings when they would give the family instruction concerning alcoholism and the family disease, because we didn't know anything about addiction or alcoholism or 12-step. And I was willing to take some action, writing out my history of my relationship with alcohol. If you haven't done that with regard to a suspected addiction or a known addiction that you have, write out your autobiography in bullet points. Write it out in bullet points, just summaries, not a script of story, but just bullet points of what the addiction is, when you used it, what did you use, how much did you use, what happened when you used, and bring it from the original beginning point all the way up to the present moment. Writing it out, handwriting, or some of you most of you who type, is probably an effective method. And then read it to somebody else. That's what broke it open for me. Writing it out helped me see the puzzle pieces from age 12 to age 43. 30 years of drinking, periodically having blackouts and pass outs and lots of trouble in my life due to the alcohol, which I had never seen before. But reading it out was what had given me the experience. Oh man, I think I have a problem with alcohol. And of course, that raised the next question. Now what do I do? So I'm asking you to ask yourself right now, what is your primary source of suffering? Notice I didn't ask you what your suffering is. I use words very carefully, and it's better if you pay attention to the words I use and try to hear the words I use in the context I use them. What is the current source of your suffering? Source of your suffering. Write that out. That participation keeps you connected to this process that we're exposing you to and the experience that might be available to you. Asking yourself, well, what did I hear? What does it mean? How does it apply to my life? What is my experience with what Herb's talking about, either in life or in the book or in the program or with the sponsor? The man who took me through the steps when I was 4 years sober said, and look up at me on the screen if you can see me. I know it's smaller than the PowerPoint. He said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have no transformation. That was so powerful. You have a lot of information. You have knowledge. You heard it referenced. I have a graduate education in psychology, in philosophy, in theology. I studied to be a Catholic priest. I was a monk for 7 years. I did human development and all the stuff that you did in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s to expand your consciousness. And I'm 4 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm meeting this man for the first time. I'm giving him a synopsis of my life. And he does this in a restaurant. You have very wonderful, deep exposure to information. 4 years sober in the rooms, you have no transformation because your knowledge has never gone to your heart and gone to your feet, and you don't have an experience of being changed. And he quoted Einstein. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. I cannot fix my mind with my mind because my mind is the problem, and any problem that my mind solves will have the problem embedded in it. I love brilliance, wisdom sayings like this. And this man introduced me to a prayer to have an open mind and an open heart. I'm inviting you to make a commitment today, just for the next hour, 2 hours, whenever we're together. Just for now, that you're inviting the Spirit, whatever that means to you, capital S, to create a whiteboard in your head and in your heart and in your soul. And allow the Spirit to write on the whiteboard to give you new knowledge and new information and a new experience. To the extent that I hold on to my old information and my old experience, I'm prevented from having any new information or new experience. Please join me in prayer for an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Again, ask yourself the questions. Where's my life not working? As an introduction to chapter 5, Bill calls chapter 5 How It Works. He spends quite a bit of time talking about rigorous honesty. We can only be as honest as we can be. We can only see what we can see. We can only know what we can know. And I know that my problem is that I don't know what my problem is. I'm totally blown away by my inability to see that I don't see. I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see. And I was 43 years old when I had my first experience of that, connecting the dots of my alcohol problem, and then 4 years later, connecting the dots of my spiritual problem. I was 4 years sober in the rooms, going to a meeting every day, talking to a sponsor every day, doing big books studies and step studies. I'm a very diligent student and a very sort of ambitious, task-oriented person who wants to grow in my consciousness and my humanity and my effectiveness. Those have been my life goals since I was 10 years old. And at age 48, I realized I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see, even with all of that background. And I was restless, irritable, and discontent. Oh, I was 4 years sober. But I was very unhappy at my work and very unhappy in my marriage and very unhappy with myself. Apparently my efforts hadn't been so effective at this point. I really did want my life to change, but I had no idea what the change should be and how to operate that change. This is a word that came to me several years ago in my meditation. I use it every morning. What is the invitation? What is the invitation? For the day, certainly, but maybe for my life. Once a year, I spend the last 3 months of the year, in the last 10 years, each year for the last 3 months of the year, I incorporate that question into my morning meditation with regard to my life, and especially for the coming year, to try to have a understanding as to what the Spirit's invitation is for me in terms of the use of my time and the use of my talents. Step one has a particular history. AA has a particular history, and it's really relevant to step one. Carl Jung sent the first person that we're aware of to find a spiritual experience, Roland Hazard. He said, you have to find a spiritual experience. And Roland said, oh, I'll go back to church. And Carl said, you're not listening, young man. I didn't say church. I said, you need a spiritual experience. He didn't tell him what that was. He didn't tell him where to find it. But fortunately, this guy went back to church in New York, and he came across the Oxford group in the Episcopal Cathedral. The Oxford group had been created by Frank Buckman, a Lutheran minister originally, but the Episcopalians had taken the leadership at this time. Sam Shoemaker was its head, became a really good friend of Bill Wilson's, and they had created 6 steps. Those are the original steps that Bill Wilson worked. Those are the original steps that Bob Smith worked. They're on page 263 in the big book if you want to take a look at them. At least this is one interpretation of it. And then Dr. Silkworth was the key for Bill. He was a psychiatrist that was in charge of the alcohol and mental illness ward in Towns Hospital. And he helped Bill see that alcoholism is a disease, and it has a couple components in it. A component that is biological and a component that is psychological. Bill was able to, over time, appreciate that a human being is human, not because we have a body that doesn't distinguish us from any other created reality, but that we have a mind and that we have a will. We have a mind that thinks and a will that makes decisions. And the 12-step process is based on that. You'll take a look at it. It's an interesting observation. All of the even steps are knowing steps. All of the odd steps are decision and action steps. This is the way we're built. Human beings are human because we can reflect. We can know that we can transcend ourselves, we can stand outside of ourselves and look at ourselves. And we can learn from our behavior, and we can change our behavior on a voluntary basis. Learning and changing, knowing and deciding and taking action. That is what makes us specifically human. This overview of the 12 steps is like a rocket launch. The first stage of the rocket launch is an acknowledgement that I need power and a decision to find power. Steps 1 through 3. Steps 4 through 7 is establishing a relationship with ourself. I define spirituality as a relationship. We really don't need to talk about spirit with a capital S, or God, or divine, or higher power with an H and a P. Of course, the book does, and I do, and that's my belief system, but I'm also very aware that some of you don't, and you resist anything that has any connection to remotely or directly organized religion. Bill was very conscious of that. He said, God, as we understand God, it might have been more accurate and more acceptable if we had said, God, as we don't understand God. Whatever that reality is, it's not comprehensible by the human being. It's like trying to put the ocean in a bucket. The bucket's too small. It won't handle the ocean. My mind is finite. My understanding is finite. As a human being, I'm a bucket. I cannot comprehend infinite, but I can embrace it. And that's what we do in steps 1 through 3. And then we remove the clouds in us to the sunlight in us in steps 4 through 7. And in steps 8 and 9, we establish a relationship, or reestablish our relationship with others in steps 8 and 9. So that we can have our way of life. The program of recovery are steps 1 through 9. The program of living are steps 10 through 12. Step 1 is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Now, if in fact you have not a problem with alcohol, but you have a problem with some other form of addiction, Bill addresses that in the big book. In the first preface to the first edition, 1939, in the first paragraph of that preface, Bill says, our way of living may have its advantages for all. Certainly all people with an addiction, and we've come to know that now. In 1951, Al-Anon was established. And after that, at least here in Southern California, we have over 100 different 12-step programs addressing over 100 different forms of addiction. Our way of living may have its advantages for all, certainly encompasses that, but I think it's even broader than that. This is the foreword to the first edition of the big book, and Bill was a prophet. Probably more of a prophet than he even realized, because I think he was talking about the human race. All human beings would benefit from this 12-step methodology, because it's not built just for addiction, although that was the originating reason to deal with alcohol. He anticipated that it might have a benefit for other people. His own spiritual director, Father Ed Dowling, a Jesuit priest, met him in 1940 because Father Dowling knew intuitively from reading the big book that it was an authentic book that would create a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, and he had a problem with eating. He had an eating disorder. He was a compulsive overeater. And he says, I intuitively know that what will work for an alcoholic will work for me too. And he became Bill Wilson's spiritual director for the next 20 years. Father Dowling died in 1960. So one of the things that developed out of this history, looking at the problem of alcohol, was that it's a problem of the body. Dr. Silkworth says that, and I'm going to explore that in much more detail in a minute. Many people don't really understand what phenomenon of craving means. The real problem, however, he says, is the problem of the mind. Many people really don't understand what an obsession means. But the best kept secret in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is unmanageability. Notice Bill puts a dash in there. He doesn't say and. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, dash, that our life had become unmanageable. Of course, our life is going to be unmanageable if, in fact, we have active addiction to anything. But that's not what Bill means, and that's not what my understanding of it, and that's what I'll show you in the final piece of the work that we'll do today. What does unmanageability mean? It means a problem of the will. You see, reinforcing what I had just said about the human being. Yes, we have a body, but that doesn't make us any different than a gorilla. What makes us different is that we have a mind and that we have a will. The mind dysfunction is a problem, but it's not the problem. It's a classic problem in addiction, but it's not the problem of humanity. The real problem and the source of our suffering is our unmanageability as human beings, not as addicts. 10% of people in the United States are alcoholic. 50% of people probably are connected to that 10%. And they're either codependents, adult children of alcoholics, or they're in some form of need to be in Al-Anon because of the dysfunctional relationships that have been established out of the history with dealing with alcohol and or drug addiction or some other form of addiction or trauma. But that's only a percentage of people. 100% of the human race is unmanageable. And Bill says that. Pages 60 to 62. Selfish and self-centered. Self will run riot. And addicts, alcoholics, are extreme example of self will run riot. All human beings are self will run riot. Addicts are a unique example of that. Powerless over alcohol. Our life is unmanageable. Let's unpack that. I have 3 teachings that I want to give you an experience with. Certainly one with the body, that's where we start. That's where the big book starts. It starts with Dr. Silkworth's opinion. After I give that assignment to people about Dr. Silkworth's opinion, and we finish it, the other person finishes it and meets with me after reading and highlighting it, the first question I ask is, so what is the doctor's opinion? It's like seeing a deer in headlights. They had never really bothered to connect the title with, in fact, what was going to be in the letter. What Dr. Silkworth says is that we have an allergy that produces a craving. We also have something wrong with our mind. He alludes to it, but he doesn't actually unpack it very much. He's a psychiatrist, but primarily he's a medical doctor. So he's looking at the body like a doctor would, and he's diagnosing the problem like a doctor would. He's evaluating, so what are the physical symptoms of what's going on? He uses the term craving. Now, if you look it up in the dictionary, you will not find the meaning that Dr. Silkworth has. The dictionary says a craving is the anticipation of or the desire for. That's not the way Dr. Silkworth uses it. When you read it the next time, Dr. Silkworth's opinion, pay attention to how he uses the word craving. He says the craving never happens till after you engage in the drink. For those of you who have an addiction, there's a couple different categories based on current classification: substance addiction, alcohol, drugs, and food, or process addiction. relationship, anger, fear, pornography, work, exercise, religion, AA meetings. Well, what's an addiction, Herb? An addiction is any repetitive behavior over which I have no control, which leads to negative consequences. It's not an official definition. It's not a scientific definition. It's Herb's way of trying to explain powerlessness. We become so brain dead to the word. I try to find other words. Powerless, no choice. You see, Dr. Silkworth is explaining a biological imperative, a biological mandate. If I had a tumbler of white water, clear white water, and I took a bottle of black ink and I poured it into the bottle, that white water would turn black, irretrievably black, automatically. When I pour alcohol into the chemistry of my body, the chemistry of alcohol triggers a combustion that doesn't happen in normal people. There's some speculation that it's a dysfunctional liver, that my liver processes it different than other people. Normal people drink alcohol, the liver processes it, absorbs some of it in the system, and some of it, most of it is urinated out. Not an alcoholic. An alcoholic's liver processes it into the cellular structure in the form of acetone, a chemical. And when it goes into the cellular structure demands more acetone. I'm not sure that my description is scientifically correct. I think it is, but it doesn't matter, because even if it's a metaphor, it's explaining the phenomena here, the phenomenon of craving. Once the alcohol gets introduced into my biological bloodstream and cellular structure, my biological cell stream and bloodstream and cellular structure is determining that what I drink and when I drink and how much I drink. There's no more control in my head or in my heart or in my willpower or in my knowledge. That's what he means. It sets up a combustion over which I have no control. I went to the bar. I told my wife I was going to have a couple drinks. I intended to have 2 and I had 22. I didn't mean to do that. And that occurred periodically for 30 years. Now that also indicates another problem. How could I not see the pattern? But I didn't see the pattern. I'm staying with this piece right now. Dr. Silkworth says we have an allergy. Once I engage in the substance of the process, I'm hijacked. So the only solution is absolute abstinence. Absolute abstinence. Well, that's pretty straightforward for alcohol and drugs, but it's not that straightforward with regard to food. I do a lot of work with the FA and OA people. And I'll tell you what, that seems to me, it's not my problem, it's not my experience, it's not my fellowship, but I've been exposed to it for 10 to 15 years. It seems to be the most difficult addiction to deal with, and it has all of the earmarks of a fatal addiction that we have with alcohol. We have a problem with our mind. We have a thought that hijacks us. We have an obsession that is a delusion. Now, I have up on the board there, insane. Bill uses that. In step 1, when he describes Jim's story, the car salesman, pages 35 to 37. Most people don't get it. Most people don't understand it. Most people misquote it. Most people misuse it. Insane is not psychiatric or psychological. Insane comes from the Latin word, the derivative sanus, S-A-N-U-S, which means health. And when you put an I-N in front of it, it means not healthy. That's all it means. It doesn't mean crazy as in neurotic. It doesn't mean crazy as in schizophrenic. It doesn't mean crazy as in sociopath or psychopath. Now, many of us have comorbidity with regard to mental illness, but that's not the point here. What does Bill say in step 2? Returned to sanity? And I hear such garbage about that in the 12-step meeting. I'm sorry, it comes out of ignorance, and I have very little tolerance for that. I don't speak up because I don't create controversy. I want to be helpful. But that's one of the reasons I do these workshops, is to try to be very clear as to what Bill meant. It's phenomenal when we understand what Bill meant. He means that our minds don't work correctly. Listen to his definition, Bill Wilson's definition on page 37. After Jim and the car salesman who put a little whiskey in his milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can a lack of proportion, a lack of the ability to think straight, be called anything else? A lack of proportion, unhealthy thinking, the inability to think straight. But what he talks about is an obsession. An obsession is a thought. Not all thoughts are an obsession. An obsession is a particular kind of thought. Our mind produces thought. Obsession is a particular kind of thought. It's the thought that dominates the screen in such a way that there's no other thought on the screen. Obsession. It takes possession of us without our permission and without our consciousness. Hear the no choice. Without our permission and without our consciousness. If we have the thought of a drink, we can call a sponsor, we can go to a meeting, we can pray, we can do some writing, we can reach out and help somebody. Absolutely wonderful solutions if you have a thought. If you have an obsession, you won't know you have a thought. You'll just be hijacked. And the problem with the obsession is that it's a delusion. The thought is the obsession. But the content of the thought is a delusion, a lie. And the most common one we use today in our understanding and in our conversation, and we hear it all the time in the rooms, and it's good, it's very deep wisdom. It'll be different this time. And we really believe it. It will be different this time. And when we mean different, we mean at least okay, or we mean even better. Now, it's never better, it's never okay, but we don't see that it's not better, and we don't see that it's not okay. And that's the insanity. We're not able to connect the dots. In fact, in the next story, next to Jim's story, is Fred's story, and he uses this, my most favorite phrase in step 1, a strange mental blank spot. I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I can't see. I cannot connect the dots. I was not surprised that I had a drinking problem and that I was an alcoholic when it was revealed to me at age 43. I was not surprised. I was absolutely shocked that I had never seen it. 7 years in a monastery seminary, 7 years of silence, reflecting. 5 years in the study of psychology and the training to be one and all the therapy, preparing to do that and learning how to do therapy. And I had never seen it. All the self-help of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and I had never seen it. I prided myself on being a seeker. I had no idea that I wasn't a finder. Frank Buckman gave us the 6 steps. Bill gave us the 12 steps. And the whole purpose of that is spiritual awakening. One of the philosophers in the 19th century is a Russian Gurdjieff. He said, all human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. I just love that. All human beings are asleep, dreaming that we're awake. Bill knew that. Maybe not the phrase, But in crafting step 12, he said, having had a spiritual awakening, because he knows that we're spiritually asleep. And the spiritual is, in fact, the source of the suffering. The nature of my will, the nature of my free will isn't free. In many cases, it's not free with regard to my addiction, and it's not free in terms of my choices. My will always choose me. Bill says on page 45, lack of power is our dilemma. Page 45, did I say? Lack of power is our dilemma. We have to find a power by which we could live. Notice, not by which we could quit drinking, not by which we could manage our addiction, by which we could live unmanageability. I'm going to come back to unmanageability in a minute. Right now, I want to deal with addiction. Two different kinds of addiction, as I mentioned before, substance and process. There's only two signals for us of addiction, very easy to determine. When I start, I cannot stop. And when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. The problem of the body is when I start, I cannot stop because it's a biochemical reaction, whether that be out of the liver or out of the brain. Most scientists today are determining that it's brain dysfunction addiction, and most of it's genetic. You might have noticed, I'm white, I'm male, and I'm bald. It's not my fault. My father, his father, his father, his father, 5 generations are white, male, bald, and all of us alcoholic. I inherited my baldness from the 5 generations. I inherited my genetic alcoholism. I'm not excusing it, I'm explaining it. And there's some speculation that most of addiction problems are genetically passed on from someplace in the genetic tree. So let's take a look at your body. What is your experience with addiction? When you start, are you always able to stop, or did you ever overshoot eating? Did you ever overshoot your use of pornography? Did you ever overshoot your relationship with your work? Well, what happens? Do you have an example of that for yourself? I'm asking you to think about it and maybe even make some notes. I would love to precipitate in you a new experience, a new awareness of the nature of your addiction. What's your attempts to stop? Have you stopped before? And why? And did you stay stopped? How successful have you been? How honest have you been with others? Maybe a spiritual director, or maybe a therapist, or maybe a spouse, or a significant other, or a good friend. The only real question is, when I start, did I ever lose control? Now, most of us will have a story about why I lost control. My father died. My wife left me. My child died. Those are just stories. I'm asking, and the story is relevant to your life and your feelings, but irrelevant to your evaluation of your addiction. Did you ever lose control when you started? Now, it's a tricky question because I could have answered the question, sometimes periodically. In fact, I did in the early days of looking at this, because it didn't happen to me every time. My wife was the example of a chronic alcoholic. Every time she drank until she passed out. And in the last 5 to 10 years, she drank every day. Disgusting, I said to myself. What a lack of control. What a lack of personal care from his high chair. And I say that very carefully, from his high chair. Because there I was, periodically not coming home, periodically not going back to work, periodically passing out. But it didn't happen every time. And that's what blinded me from it. I call that a periodic alcoholic. Every bit as alcoholic as the chronic alcoholic, it just manifests differently. And Bill says that in the book. Our drinking patterns differ. But what about our mind? Did you ever stop? Have you made a resolution? I stopped many Januaries, and I was very good January through January, end of January. I stopped for Lent many times, and I was really good. And on Easter, I celebrated the Lord's rising with mine. Absolutely. I stopped for 90 days in a self-development program. I had no trouble stopping. But when I did this inventory, I could see that I started again. What was I thinking just before I engaged each time after a 30-day or a 60-day or a 90-day quit? That's the only question that's relevant. Did you start again, and what were you thinking after you had made a commitment to stop and you had stopped for a weekend or a week or a month or a year or 10? You had made a decision. I get this all the time. Oh, I stopped for anytime I want. I stopped for 2 years once. Well, the key here is it's all past tense. You stopped, but you started. So you didn't stop. No, I stopped for 2 years. No, you didn't stop. You had a hiatus of 2 years, but you started again. Did you ever stop and start again? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were you aware of? In most cases, I wasn't aware that I was starting again. I wasn't aware of the devastation in my life that had created my decision to stop. I wasn't aware of how good I felt when I wasn't drinking and how bad I felt when I was drinking. None of that came together, that strange mental blank spot. And I certainly wasn't honest with the therapists and spiritual directors and good friends that I was surrounding myself with in my efforts to become a decent human being. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know how to do that. Remember, I said that the first half of the first step is only a percentage of people. Powerless, yes. No choice, yes. 1 out of 10 alcoholic, 5 out of 10 the other addictions, absolutely. But unmanageability, that's the real problem. That's the source of the problem. I asked that question at the beginning. What's the source of your suffering? It's not addiction, sorry. It might be a source of your current suffering, but it's not the source of your perennial suffering, your cyclical serial suffering. On page 52, well, let me go to page 45, first of all. I think I've already read it, but Bill says, our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. We could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. He says the lack of power is our problem. The lack of willpower is our problem. The lack of effective connection to power is our problem. Our addiction is not the problem. Our addiction is not the problem. It's a problem. It's just not the problem. On page 52, I was at 10 years of sobriety, introduced to the bedevilments. I use that term because that term is in the paragraph on page 52, that second paragraph. But the man had me put it into personal pronoun in present tense. And I ask you to use this as your inventory checklist, like we had with the body and the mind. Take a look at this inventory here. I am having trouble with personal relationships. Let's assume that you're abstinent. Let's assume that you don't have any real issue with your addiction. You might have it, and these questions are still relevant, but I'm really speaking to the people who have some traction with their addiction in abstinence. I am having trouble with personal relations. Anybody having trouble with a significant other, with a parent, with a child, with a sibling, with a boss, with a coworker, with a subordinate, with a sponsor, with a sponsee? Anybody having trouble with personal relationships? I can't control my emotional nature. Do we have cyclical fear? Do we have cyclical anger? Do we have cyclical shame and guilt in an unhealthy way? And you can't seem to be controlling it, and you go to therapy, and you've been going for a long time, and you're still a mess? I am a prey to misery and depression, P-R-E-Y. It's eating my lunch. I can't make a living, it says in the big book, but I took it into meditation because I had a great job, a good career, paid me a decent amount of money, never enough, but a decent amount of money. And in my meditation, the wee small voice in me said, Herb, you can't make a living that satisfies you. And it went on to say, because you're never satisfied. You're a bottomless pit. You're a deep, dark hole. There's not enough power or prestige or recognition or money or pleasure, is there? My wee small voice is very direct. I have a feeling of uselessness. I am full of fear. I am unhappy. I can't seem to be of real help to other people. I took that into meditation. What do you mean? I studied to be a Catholic priest that was all about ministry. I studied then to become a psychologist that was all about helping people. If I can't save your soul, I'll at least help heal your mind, your psyche. Then I did all the self-development stuff, and then I do AA, and I'm sponsoring people, and I'm very visible in my community. And I went quiet. And the wee small voice became very loud. Herb, you don't really want to help people. You don't really care about people. You want the reputation of helping people. It was devastating because it was true. Now, mixed motives, of course, but I listened to that message and not try to defend myself. At the same time, I was in therapy. This is from the DSM. That's the Diagnostic Manual of Psychologists and Psychiatrists. And we were talking about my journey in the 12 steps and my understanding of unmanageability and those bedevilments. And this man, who was my therapist and now has become my friend, got up from his chair. This is 30 years ago. Went over to his manual and took a page out, made a photocopy of it and gave it to me. And then he said, read the 9 characteristics of narcissism. An exaggerated sense of self-importance. I'm going to summarize it. 2, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success power. 3, belief of being special. 4, require excessive admiration. 5, sense of entitlement. 6, selfishness in taking advantage of others to achieve their own ends. 7, lacking empathy. 8, envy of others. 9, behaviors or attitudes that are arrogant, haughty, patronizing, or contemptuous. I read it out loud. And the therapist said to me, and the only thing missing from the DSM is your picture. Wow. I was embarrassed, but I was actually also impressed. There was actually a diagnosis for the troubles in my life. And he said, by the way, they're untreatable. They're irremediable. They cannot be remedied by therapy and or by medication. And I said, well, how bad am I? He said, well, on a scale of 10, you're a 7.5, and we put 10s in prison. 10 or 15 years later, I'd done some really significant spiritual work, and we met again to do some professional work together because of circumstances that are not relevant here. We co-facilitate workshops on emotional sobriety now and have for the last 20 years. And when we got together that 20 years ago, I said, you remember that conversation in your office that day about 7.5 and 10 in prison? I said, how bad am I now as you assess me? He said, 2.5. Because the work that you do spiritually has healed your soul. The work that you do spiritually has minimized and eliminated most of your character defects. That was really impressive. Not only did I know it was true because of my own personal experience, but I was getting confirmation from a professional who today has 50 years of sobriety. I came across, to lighten it up just a little bit, I came across a wonderful phrase about relevant to this. An alcoholic is quite capable of such feelings as affection, caring, and love. I'm going to read it again. An alcoholic, I'm going to say an addict is quite capable of such feelings as affection, caring, and love. These feelings just do not involve anyone else. That was my experience, unfortunately. So you can see that addiction is a problem. It's the presenting problem. That suffering brings us into the rooms of therapy, the rooms of religion, the rooms of a good relationship, the rooms of self-help. The 12-step room is one solution. I'm not saying it's the only solution, but it's the only solution that I found that works, because it was able to identify the spiritual malady and give me a methodology that's profoundly effective to deal with my spiritual problem. The real problem. I did not find it in the monastery. I did not find it in psychology. I did not find it in human development. I did not find it in AA those first 4 years. I was in a meeting when I heard a man share about his experience with the Big Book and the Steps, the Big Book as a textbook and the Steps as a methodology, that he needed a step guide to guide him through and walk that path, to apply them specifically to his specific needs at that time. And that when he finished the 9th step, he had a spiritual awakening. The body is a problem, but it's not the problem. How do you stop drinking? You can't. How do you stop your addiction? You can't. You're hopeless. You're powerless. You're doomed. That's the surrender of complete defeat, the proper use of the term surrender. The word surrender doesn't belong in the 3rd step. It belongs in the 1st step. Complete defeat. I surrender. And I can't even do that. That, in fact, is a gift. Each of our surrenders is different. Each of our surrenders is brought about by an experience of no choice, an experience of defeat, an experience of pain and suffering. A lot of times it comes from just the realization that we're blind, like a colorblind. I cannot distinguish brown and green. It's not my fault. I have a genetic predisposition in my eyes that will not allow me to process color. I can ask you for help, but I can't figure it out on my own. Obsession is what we're not cured of. Unmanageability is the problem. And you see it all the time, where people say, I don't know what happened. I was sober 10 years and I drank. I was reading something the other day that said the drink is not the evidence of the relapse. The drink is the evidence of the relapse is the evidence of a compromise of your principles. The drink is the evidence of a relapse that happened a week ago or a year ago. Your first compromise was the beginning of the slippery slope, the first compromise of your principles. I didn't know I had principles until I did the page 52, unmanageability, until I did the step 4, inventory of my resentments and my fear and my sex and my shame and my guilt and my dishonesty. A deep dive underneath my behavior to take a look at my motives and my beliefs, my experience of penetrating the unconscious. Freud said the work of the human being is to make the unconscious conscious. Otherwise, we end up thinking that we're victims of fate or victims of other people's malevolence, ill will. We need to make the unconscious conscious. And that's what we do. That's what I've experienced doing in step 4, getting underneath my resentments to see that my belief and my motives have caused my resentments. I do not have a part in my resentments. Well, you hear it all the time in meetings, don't you? What's your part in your resentments? That's not what the big book says. Take a look at the material on pages 64 through 67 on resentments. Especially page 67, where it describes in that last paragraph the 5 questions about selfishness and self-centeredness. Talks about our role, not our part. I don't have a part in my resentments. What I found is that I have 100%. Circumstances and people have nothing to do with my resentments. Circumstances and people are my perceived problem, but the real problem is my reaction to my perceived problem. People and circumstances are not my problem. My reaction to people and circumstances is my problem, and I owned it in 1988 for the very first time, 48 years old. Shocking, embarrassing that I had not seen it. I didn't know it. I hadn't treated it. But very humbled and grateful that at that point I was able to see it and deal with it, so that I was brought from this to this. Now, you can still see that there's a part of me that still believes that I'm in jail. All I have to do is realize that there's no ceilings and no floor and no walls. There's just pathetic Herbie holding bars in front of his face thinking he's in jail. You see, I don't have an authentic relationship with reality. I have a story. I have a Hollywood storefront. I have a persona. I have a mask. And with the help of the program, of course, meetings are important. Of course, the big book is the instruction and text manual. Of course, the 12 steps contained in the big book is a precise methodology for transformation. That's the promise of the 12th step, isn't it? A spiritual awakening. Of course, prayer is important, if in fact it's powerless, or at least a positive affirmation about the energy and the force in the universe. I mean, I can neutralize it out of the world of spirit into the world of sort of a generic positive thinking. It's okay. It doesn't matter what the words are. I don't need to know what God is. I need to decide that God is. And then I need to decide to act as if it's true. Helping others is wonderful. It's one of the 2 ingredients for happiness. To help other people. The first ingredient is to have a relationship with reality that's meaningful, a relationship with context, an overall sense of where I belong in the universe, a connection to a power other than myself. Read the literature out of positive psychology or out of the Harvard School of Happiness. Anybody who wants to be happy will never be happy. That's the conclusion of the 10 books I read. Anybody who wants to be happy will never be happy, because happiness is not a product, it's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of my relationship with a meaning bigger than myself and my contribution to the human beings around me. Sound familiar? Sounds to me very much like an echo of steps 11 and step 12. You know, the most important part in this program of recovery, this 12-step program of all the moving parts, that's why it's in a different color. Sponsorship. Because if you have an effective relationship with an experienced person, notice the qualifiers, an effective relationship, you're actually talking to them and taking direction. With an experienced person, they know what they're doing. They understand the big book and the step process. They themselves have applied the steps to themselves, and they themselves have had a spiritual awakening, and they themselves are living this way of life 10, 11, and 12 on a consistent basis. What an order, I can't go through with it. I'm setting the ideal. Sponsorship is the most important ingredient. I used to think meetings were until I did the steps. Once I did the steps, I got quite righteous, and I thought the steps, that was the key. And then as the Spirit rounded off the edges of my righteousness in my meditation practice and in my relationship with reality of really trying to help people, I saw that sponsorship was the key. Because if you have a sponsor, you'll do all the other moving parts. It's about awakening. It's about the turning that is committed to in step 3 from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness, as I just mentioned. Our relationship with other with a capital O and a relationship with others with a small o, steps 11 and 12. This is our way of life. Turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Read page 14 at the top. Simple but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. It's the program captured in that page as part of Bill's own story on page 14. What is a spiritual awakening? We probably need to know that right up front. It's the promise of the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I'm not paraphrasing, that's a direct quote. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. I'm emphasizing the. What is a spiritual awakening? Very simply, Appendix 2 describes it. It's a change in the way we think and feel and behave. We think in our mind, we feel in our emotions, we behave with our willpower and our decisions and our actions. And it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. This is the trip of co-creation. This is the collaboration of willingness and grace. My willingness to take direction, my willingness to take action, and God's grace to make it all work. I don't know how it works. I do know that it works. Which comes first, willingness or grace? I don't know. I took it into meditation. I still don't know, but I got a poem out of it. The wee small voice helped me, put me at ease. Willingness and grace. I was taken to a place of willingness. Hear the grace of that. I was taken to a place of willingness. But I was willing to be taken. Hear my part and my action and my contribution. Co-creation. Alchemy. Look up the word alchemy. It's a word from the Middle Ages where snake oil salesmen were selling potions to people that would change iron, pig iron, into gold. People bought it. People are gullible. Alchemy. That's what this is. Changing my self-centeredness into my other-centeredness to place me in alignment with reality, in alignment with the flow, in alignment with the life, in alignment with the light. My word for step 3 is alignment. It's not in the big book, but it really helps me understand what we mean. And when we get to that, we'll talk about it. It's a process, not an event. It's one like a dimmer switch. That spiritual awakening goes up a notch at a time as we pay attention and as we take direction and as we take action. And we do the first 9 steps and we get sober. And we do the first 9 steps and we begin to enter into the world of the spirit, emotional sobriety. And as we stay in 10, 11, and 12 as a practice, we eventually have some spiritual sobriety, a relationship with reality that's meaningful and a relationship with other people that's helpful. but that dimmer switch can go down a notch at a time. And in as easy as we integrate it, we can disintegrate with a little held dishonesty, withheld resentment, untreated fear, a betrayal of our fidelity in our sex relationships, secrets that are held and not revealed. And the cancer begins and the cancer grows and the obsession returns. And when the obsession returns, we're hijacked and we're back in the darkness and the light is extinguished. This is 12-step recovery. Trust God, clean house, help others. This is our way of life, Bill calls it. Living in the fourth dimension. We'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about, is God necessary? What do we mean by God? What's the touch point? Look at the gap in the middle. What does that mean? Those fingers aren't touching. This is from the Sistine Chapel, of course. God reaching down from heaven, humans reaching up from earth in creation. We'll look at that deeply next month. What is this power? How do we find this power? That's the challenge on page 45. Chapter 4 begins that way. Lack of power is my dilemma. I have to find a power by which I could live. Well, where and how am I going to find this power? That's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. What's my problem? Of course, addiction is my problem. That's the presenting problem, but it's not the problem. On page 43, Bill says, there is no effective mental defense against the first drink with regard to our addiction. Between our body and our mind, we're hopeless. On page 62, Bill says at the end of the unmanageability discussion, on page 62, he says, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We're as powerless over our self-centeredness as we are over alcohol. In the same way he concluded the first half of the first step about addiction on page 43, no effective mental defense. Here on page 62, with regard to unmanageability, the spiritual malady, self-centeredness, we can't even reduce it much, let alone get rid of it. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. No choice. No choice over our addiction. No choice over our willpower. Where do we have choice? Bill talks about that on page 53. The proper use of the will, and the only use of the will that's at the center of humanity. There is a power or there isn't a power. What is your choice? Well, that is the end of my comments. Of course, I've got lots more to say, but right now I'm inviting you, if you want, to ask your questions, make your comments, and share anything relevant to step one.
I haven't heard that much of like people talking about like food and like other types of addictions, and I was wondering like, for me, like I recently stopped smoking, using nicotine and stuff, and like also trying to like have a better diet, and I was wondering like what you thought. Like, as far as that, will it like correlate towards like drug and alcohol relapses? Like if you're like unhealthy in those other ways, like smoking, eating too much sugar and like coffee, stuff like that?
Yeah. Is it a trick question?
No, I was just curious on what you thought.
You know the answer, don't you? Yeah. First of all, nicotine is a drug, and it's an addiction. But to stand back a little bit from your question, because you did ask it this way, my sense is that if in fact your drugs and alcohol are the problem, that's where your focus is. Let your food and your nicotine take care of itself at some later time, unless you want to just jump in and suffer all the pain at once. And that might be somebody's decision also. You know what I mean? Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sponsorship, guidance, people who have walked the journey with you and before you, that's really the key there. Because I know people who quit everything all at once, get the suffering over with. I know people who do it incrementally over time. Yeah, but deal with the first things first, drugs and alcohol first, and don't let anything else distract you from that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. You're so fortunate to be so young and in the group that you're in. I know you guys have watched you for over probably 8 to 10 years. It's a magnificent opportunity for young men. Thank you. Yep. You bet.
I woke up this morning, was like, I'm gonna be abstinent, and then I was like, okay, let me go to Starbucks one more time before I go on my Herb K call. And my question is, should I just like whiten? I really just want to stop eating, but it's
all right.
like I want to.
Are you in the 12? No. I know. See, you've got this wonderful ingredient. You're suffering. I'm sorry to be happy, but I'm happy that you're suffering, because it's going to be the springboard for you, because you don't want to suffer. So are you in a 12-step program?
Yes.
Which one?
I'm in FA.
All right. Do you have a sponsor?
I do. I have a great sponsor.
You take direction. Oops. All right. So, it's your choice. If you want to get better, feel better, you have to do better. All right. And the way you do better is take direction and get into the step work and begin working the steps. And the steps promise freedom. Read pages 83 and 84. They promise freedom placed in a position of neutrality, but that's after you finish the 9th step. After you finish the 9th step, that's when the promise of abstinence is got the stake drilled into the ground. After you finish your 9th step, not a moment sooner. All right. Now it might happen sooner, but it's promised, guaranteed after you finish your 9th step. Stay gently pressed up against it. There's no violence here. You're not going to arm wrestle this thing to the ground. You just lean into the spirit. See, lack of power is our dilemma. Not lack of willpower, not lack of intelligence, not lack of willingness. No, some of that might be true, but lack of power really is. How do you access the power that is available to you? How do you access the power that is available to you? That's what we'll be talking about next month, all right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Thank you.
I really appreciated the thing about Dr. Silkworth and the reminding me what the definition of the craving, and that I have no control over that. I was thinking about, I'm not an alcoholic, but I had it in my family. So the addiction, the predilection to obsessing.
What is your addiction though?
Well, I really identify with love addiction. I'm in SLAA. I never thought I really have sex addiction, but dysfunctional relationships, giving them over my higher power to whatever partner I think is going to solve the world, or whatever.
Not continuing to own your own self.
I feel like I've learned so much, and this, your way of explaining. It's just so relevant and applicable to life, as you said, not just any particular program, but so I just want to thank you, and I'm going to really grateful to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I found in the steps what I was looking for in the monastery.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so committed to it. I finally found something that really works, not only for me, but anybody that I talk to that in fact adopts it and is consistent with it. So thanks very much.
I just was wondering, you talked about after working the steps, you talked about disintegration happens when I become, and I'm not sure I heard this, but you just talked about working the steps, and disintegration happens when I become dishonest. Is that what you said?
I sure did.
Okay, is that dishonest about anything in my life?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I hear what you're trying to defend something.
No, I just,
Yes, no, you wouldn't be asking that question unless you were trying to rationalize something. The book is very clear on page 84. We enter the world of the spirit. We're not cured. We have a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Every day we must be in alignment with my understanding of God's will. I wonder what that means.
so, okay, how can I, as a person, be 100% honest?
All right, that is your question for yourself. A wonderful discussion with your sponsor. Are you aware of where you're dishonest?
Yes, I have some areas where I'm dishonest, I would say.
Right. So what are you, these are rhetorical questions now. What are you defending? And I wonder what rigorous honesty means in the program.
Okay, when I look at when they say rigorous honesty and how it works, at that point in my recovery, I would look at it as about being a food addict or my alcoholism. And as I move forward, I become honest about the things that are revealed to me in my 4th step, 5th step, 6th and 7th step.
Yeah.
Because initially my real rigorous no wiggle room for me has to be, am I an addict or am I not an addict? Because that's where my initial delusion has to.
First of all, your thinking is wonderful. It's progressive like the dimmer switch, but it's really limited. You have blinders on. As a human being, you have clouds in you that block you from the sunlight of the spirit. To the extent that you have those clouds, you prevent the sunlight. Those clouds are your dishonesty. Those clouds are your resentments and your fears and your secrets and your guilt and your shame and any disturbance in you. That's how the 10th step is in the 12 and 12, isn't it? It's a spiritual axiom. Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. Any disturbance in you is a cloud that prevents the sunlight from from touching you. Think about outside. When you come outside, a clear sky, there's no block from the sunlight. But if the clouds come in, you don't get the sunlight. It's the same inside of us. The sunlight of the spirit, Bill uses that poetic, wonderful, mystical phrase, the sunlight of the spirit underlying the totality of things. So it's just a matter of how free do you want to be? That's all. You can continue shading the truth and defending whatever it is you think you need to protect. I asked my sponsor, what does he mean by rigorous honesty? He said, transparency. I said, what do you mean by transparency? He said, your insides and your outsides match. Pretty straightforward stuff. And you don't have to do anything, but you will suffer the consequences of everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the question is, how can I use the principles in the big book to help with folks that are in a harm reduction model or a smart recovery model of treatment?
Sure. Wow. A really, really good question. What's the overall strategy in harm reduction for people to learn in order to be able to live their life in a satisfactory way? What's the overall sort of premise, solution? In the 12-step program, the solution is a relationship with power.
Yes.
What's the overall solution in a harm reduction program? What are they trying to accomplish?
Well, the exit sign is about self-confidence, self-esteem.
Good. Thank you. No, that answers the question.
Okay.
So how do you best develop self-esteem and self-confidence from the framework of a 12-step program?
For me, it's in the 4th and 5th and 10th step.
That would be exactly where I would have gone.
We'll take them there. Okay.
Inventory, right? So that you're self-aware, and then meditation so that you're connecting to your true self.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what I would focus on. That's great.
The programs are more about the biological side you described in the addiction, where our program, that's helpful. If they're willing to do that, I will take them there. Thank you.
Well, but your question was, how can I bring the power of the 12 steps to a harm reduction model? You can
Yes.
do with inventory and meditation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
No, thank you for it, because I had never been asked the question, and now I have a whole new arrow in my quiver.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, what would be, I have a higher power now, but besides having just the higher power, what else would be beneficial for me to strengthen my recovery?
Are you in a 12-step program?
I am, and I have a sponsor, and I'm on step 1.
Oh, wonderful. Then finish the steps, because here you are. This is amazing, isn't it? I don't know whether you heard what you just said. I have been so sick, I had to have a liver transplant from my alcohol use, and now I'm using alcohol.
No, I'm not using now. I had 4 months the other day.
Wait, don't be defensive. I'm not being accusatory. You said that you relapsed after 9 months after you had a liver transplant.
Yeah.
No choice, right?
No choice.
No power. So you need power. Your life is on the line more than anybody's that I've met in recent history. You had a liver transplant. If that liver doesn't work, you die. And yet you drank.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, fear and knowledge are not going to be effective, are they? There's nothing that you can do. You're going to die unless you find power. What's your reaction to that?
It's kind of like when my counselor asked me, where's my desperation?
Well, I don't hear desperation.
No, that was the issue. She didn't either. She wants to know where it was. And
Okay,
I
so
think,
so work with your sponsor, do the steps, and you might get a little advanced training in meditation. Ask her to give you a little advanced training in meditation so that you can begin to develop and practice a relationship with power.
okay. I've been practicing, yeah. I've been practicing with power. It's starting to come, into my life regularly.
Right.
So I just have to keep working on that then, I guess. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
lean, as I say, lean gently into it, but lean. Work with
got
that sponsor that you like. That sounds really good. Thank you.
Okay.
So I am being dishonest. So as you were asking the questions, what am I being dishonest? So I get God's will and I'm like, well, I'm too busy and I forgot to go and check with God. What's my next thing to do right now? Okay. And yes, I'm not getting enough sleep and you helped me with that last time, last week. I'm the one.
Good.
Getting more sleep. I'm working on getting more sleep and I'm being honest with my sponsor and the honesty is opening up the dishonesty to me, which is amazing. Thank you.
Well, that's a log on my fire that you're hearing it and doing it. That's so wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
So I guess now the part is of me willing to do God's will moment by moment, because it truly is in my daylight. It's moment by moment, not in the morning and not in the evening saying nightly review. Oh yeah, I blew it again. Okay.
Yeah. But be gentle. The dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time. All
Okay.
right. It's not on a racing machine. It just goes up, click, and there's a little bit more light today, a little more click tomorrow, a little bit more light. Be patient with it. Be patient with it. Although stay in connection with the sponsor, stay in connection with the work, and stay conscious. Consciousness is an improving thing like that dimmer switch, more light each day.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. There is more light now. Yes. Since last week.
And you can't even imagine that we're on the dimmer switch, which is an infinite light dial, because we're in a relationship with infinite light. Today, almost 37 years on this path, I have more light than I had yesterday. And I'm anticipating more light tomorrow, because that's my experience for 37 years. All right? Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, I am trying to push myself to quit smoking too, and my family's on me with that. Should I just focus on the addiction of alcohol? And do you think that that will come later?
As I mentioned to the young man in the treatment center, you need to work with a sponsor on that piece of work, because it's very individual. Some people want to do it all at once. Some people want to do it over time. I don't know you, so I can't give you an answer to that question. But when you get a sponsor, you can talk to that person about that. Meanwhile, focus on your primary problem, which is alcohol, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Food addiction and
So those are very different. Those are very different, and those will be two different fellowships.
okay.
If you have an alcohol problem, you belong in AA. If you have a food problem, you belong in one of the food groups. And it's okay to be in two different fellowships, because those are distinctly two different problems. Same solution, but two different problems, and you need sponsorship probably in both of them.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we don't always need another sponsor in another fellowship, but in those two, they're so dramatically different. You do.
Okay. Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you.
How would I stay? I'm developing a relationship with my higher power, but how would I stay connected to that higher power while working the steps, and that I don't project that irritability and discontent onto my family? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Very sensitive of you. So you're in two different programs. Do you have two different sponsors?
Yeah.
Are you working steps with one of them?
No, this would be my first time working steps.
Yeah, but who are you working steps with?
Oh, my FA sponsor.
Okay.
She's going to support me with with doing the steps here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would suggest that you ask her to introduce you to step 10 and step 11.
Okay.
Step 10 is a spot check inventory that you can use on a daily basis to stay conscious of your relationship with your family. And step 11 will be giving you the beginning of a practice of prayer and meditation, which will allow you the power, the beginning of a relationship with power that will facilitate your journey with your sponsor. All right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. You have something else?
Well, yeah, I do the step 11. I do meditation every day, but I probably don't do step 10. I suppose it's staying connected throughout the day is what my thing is. You know, I could be great in the morning and then irritability will come. That's probably the,
Well, see, you won't,
you know, because my sponsor would often say, and then
you won't resolve that or identify the source of the problem until you do the 4th step. That's why I'm suggesting that you do a shortcut with the 10th step to at least deal with the 10th step tool.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What's your opinion of smoking marijuana while suffering from a dual disorder and being abstinent from alcohol?
Well, I don't have an opinion about it, all right, in that I don't know you or your circumstances. You deal with a sponsor concerning your sobriety, and you deal with a medical professional, whether that be a psychiatrist or a psychologist, with regard to what medications you use to manage your emotions and or your biology. So I don't have any opinion on that. I know that there are mixed views on it, all right, but it's really between you and God in the final analysis. But I personally am not trustworthy. My head will cut me a lot of slack. My head will lie to me all the time. So I need to have a doctor that I talk to. I have a psychologist that I talk to. I have a spiritual director that I talk to. I have a sponsor and a step guide. I've got 5 or 10 different people for different occasions that I talk to that give me an accountability so that I'm not lying to myself about different things.
Right. I need a sponsor that thinks weed should be legal.
You see, if you want to find somebody with a selection like that, you can always find a white Chevrolet.
I used to sell cars.
Yeah, if you're looking for a white Chevrolet, you'll find it.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, but I think you already actually intuit the answer. You just don't like it.
Oh, one other quick comment. Somebody, I guess from Nicotine Anonymous, I did quit smoking for the umpteenth time last summer. And I was shocked 5-6 years ago where somebody I knew had quit, and we were both heavy smokers. And I said, how did you do it? Yep. And she said, same way as alcohol. I asked God to forgive me to relieve me from my addiction.
Yeah, Nicotine Anonymous, I've heard very consistently helps people get detached from their nicotine addiction. Yeah. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
My mind always starts out with, I don't wanna. And I use that to help many other people get over things, because my body, my actions, thank God that I have surrendered and I take contrary actions to my thinking. But I'm, 32 years sober, and I still have that first thought is, I don't wanna.
Yeah, but
I don't wanna.
That thought to dominate your life.
I'm sorry?
You don't allow that thought to dominate your life.
Correct. But it comes up all the time.
Well, that's maybe the thorn in your shoe, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm just grateful that I don't listen to that thought.
Yep.
Thank God for the 12 steps and all the guidance, everything you've said here. I've been able to apply in my life. But I just wish my mind wouldn't think that first.
Yeah. When's the last time you did inventory? Step 4 inventory out of the big book.
About 4 years ago.
Okay. All right. And was that a good experience?
All of my 4th steps have been a marvelous experience.
Okay. Yeah. Because sometimes that helped me when I did a thorough 4th step with a new step guide. I was able to see the unhealthiness of my beliefs.
Yes.
And the corruption of my motives.
Mm-hmm.
And that seeing that allowed them to heal. And so it might be that you just have a predisposition to some type of a negative attitude. And as you know, and you've already established a very positive sort of a relationship with it by not allowing it to run your life. So
Right.
it's, yeah, you're creating a more positive habit of thinking and action.
And I know that I've used that to help a lot of newcomers or people in early sobriety about that kind of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's classic for us. We're people who are very defiant, and one of the classic sort of mantras of the old timer, which is still true and been totally validated by current psychiatry and psychology, is it doesn't matter what you know, and it doesn't matter how you feel. It does matter what you do.
Yes.
And when you do differently, you will begin to think differently and feel differently.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, thanks very much.
I would like to ask a question. Is self-centeredness the power that leads me to unmanageability?
Yeah.
And is this power derives from my spiritual emptiness? Thank you.
And the answer is yes, yes. That's really the heart of the matter as I see it. Pages 60 to 62 describe it, that self-centeredness and the manipulative thinking that goes with it. And Bill says that that is, in fact, the problem of unmanageability, referring to it as the spiritual malady. Carl Jung said that all addicts are uniquely spiritual. They have this deep thirst, this deep hunger for the spirit with a capital S, and they get distracted by spirits with a small s. A nice play on words, but it says the human being, and Pascal said it, the human being, the human being's experience is the hole in us is in the shape of God. The hole in us, that deep yearning, that deep hunger that we have for the immaterial will be never filled by the material.
So self-centeredness is a symptom.
Yeah, actually, it's a symptom of something's missing, and what's missing is the relationship with whatever that is that we're yearning for, that the source of our life, actually, the source underneath our source of life. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. One more question.
Oh, please, yeah.
Okay. Do you think that to feel this emptiness, it's how I relate with myself and reality?
What was the first word?
It's about my emptiness, how to fulfill this emptiness. It's finally the way I relate with reality, with myself, with my...
Yes, with the world and with other people. Yes. And that was the study that came out of the positive psychology and the happiness studies. And that is that all human beings are built for community and connection. A connection with a meaning bigger than ourselves and a contribution to the people around us. That's how we're built, and we are fulfilled when we are operating that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
You might look up some of the books on happiness, and because they'll be talking a lot more about what you're, I think, referring to. But from my standpoint, the solution is to work through the steps, and we come from a place of out of alignment with reality, and we turn to be in alignment with reality, me and reality in alignment, and I'm in the flow, and I have a life of contentment and meaning.
Thank you very much.
Wow, you're a deep thinker. Good questions, and I enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I understand the obvious process addictions, but I'm interested in how anger or fear is a process addiction.
Yeah, good. I mean, those are questions for you. They're not questions for me, but you heard it. So you heard an invitation here. because it rang your bell. Other people aren't asking that question because it didn't ring their bell, but it rang yours. I can't answer it. I don't know what it is, but it's an invitation. Use that set aside prayer and approach it in the same way. You talked about the tools that you have from AA and now the tools that you have from OA in terms of the step process, but approach it. Step one. What is the problem here in the body? What is the problem in the mind? What is the problem in the will in these areas of the process addiction? Take it slow. Substitute the word either anger or fear, depending on what you're looking at. Don't try to look at them both at the same time. And substitute for alcohol or for food in the step one. I think you'll have a big experience with it.
Okay, I already kind of have a better grasp on it just by listening to you explain it back to me. So once again, I'm so grateful. Appreciate you.
Yeah. And that's it. There's the exciting adventure is that there's always more light, not more work. There's always more light.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a son who has a big anxiety problem.
Mm-hmm.
Big, sticky anxiety problem. He's 19 now. He finally asked for therapy, but he calls me and he says, "What do I do?" And I try not to solve the problem for him. And I said yesterday, you've got the answers. You've got to find the answers. Any thoughts? I mean, he said things like, maybe I'm an anxiety-aholic. And I'm like, well, that's something to think about. But thoughts you have.
You're in a 12-step program and you've been in a 12-step program for 34 years.
Yep.
All right. And that's because you have some form of addiction.
Right.
And you've dealt effectively with it and your life is pretty good.
Yes.
And you have a son that has a problem.
Yes.
And he's beginning to investigate what that problem is. And it might be whatever you said it was, and he's dealing with a therapist and a professional that will evaluate it and help him. But since he's connected to you, who is an addict, why don't you send him to Al-Anon?
Well, I've thought about it and I've talked with my sponsor about it. And it's a question right now. Do I say that?
Well, wait, is he asking for advice?
Say this again?
Is he asking for advice?
He called me yesterday. He's actually in quarantine at college for 10 days, an anxious person.
Wait. Answer my question. Is he asking you for advice?
What do I do in that moment? He's asking in that moment. He's not asking globally necessarily.
Well, why don't you take an opportunity to open the door a little globally?
Yeah, I think that's
you're in relationship with me, and I'm a hardcore addict, 34 years. Why don't you go and try Al-Anon for once a week for 10 weeks and see what it feels like? My God, Al-Anon is a solution. You've been living in 34 years.
I know.
There's no harm for him to explore it.
Right. And if I say, why don't you go do that? Well, if mom says it's the kiss of death is part of, what that.
Well, that's why I asked if he asked you for advice.
Yeah. Yesterday, he asked me outright, and now he's away. I'm a recent empty nester. So he's away, and he asked me this question instead of wrapping me up in his anxiety.
Wait. I don't know what you're talking to me about.
Anyway, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes. I could have said CODA or ACOA, but those are relatively new programs and very few wisdom people. That's why Al-Anon is a long-term program with wisdom people in it. And if there's a possibility he could connect with somebody that could really help him, because I'll bet you a whole bunch of his problems are because he grew up in your house. I've got 3 children. That's and 2 of them are in program, and I'm not sure about the 3rd one.
Yeah, no, I know. I think first I had to get over it's my fault. I had to work through the it's my fault thing.
I understand that part. Yeah.
But I get it. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's the most loving thing that you could do is introduce him to your way of life.
Yeah.
My question was, will this monthly workshop be a sufficient substitute? I know Yeah, will this be a sufficient substitute to the Monday and Tuesday? I know it's not going to
Not
be in
even
much.
close.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
even close.
All
Oh,
right.
you're a real addict. You want the easier, softer way. Can't you give me the cliff notes and I'll have a spiritual awakening? The answer is no.
Yeah. Okay. All right, but you will be going through the giving direction for the steps in this one.
Yeah, in the monthly, not so much direction, although you could go to my website and get the step assignments. They're all there. And the recordings are all there. So if you wanted to do it on your own pace and your own time, you could certainly do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I can see you're kind of concerned and resisting here.
Well, no, I was actually really looking forward to doing the weekly one. I was looking forward to doing it, but I didn't know that I had class on the same day. I got school and work, and you know, I got a lot of sponsees and meetings and all that. So
you have to figure out your priorities.
yeah,
You'll figure it out. To work with your sponsor, he should help you, right?
yeah. I was talking to him about it last night. I've been talking to him about it, and just more prayer, more prayer, and more meditation on it. So, yep.
Figure out what are your priorities. What do you need the most in the next 6 months to a year and a half? What do you need the most in order for your life to come together in the best way long term? What's your investment for the next year that will be the benefit that you will have for the rest of your life?
You know, I'm actually really content. I've been through the steps with multiple people multiple times in the past 4 years.
Right.
I think I think I have an addiction to constantly wanting more.
You're a real addict.
Yeah, but yeah, for sure, definitely. I took it into prayer, right? And actually what came out was that I have codependency on what my sponsor thinks about me.
Yeah, of course. Yep. Have a conversation with your sponsor.
Yeah.
Be very healthy. All right.
So my question is, to go into total simplicity, isn't it a complete total life of absolute abandonment to the God of my understanding and knowing that I have no power over nothing? And am I willing to
in a way, I do understand what you're saying, but it's not quite accurate. You do have power, but what is the power that you have?
to make a choice?
What choice?
God.
Yes, God or no God.
Yes.
And so you live every day fostering that relationship.
Amen.
All right, knowing in the background, the bells of doom are ringing if you don't, but that's not going to motivate me. Today, what motivates me is more light. Yeah.
Right.
But that's right. That's right. So we sit in the presence of power, humbled by our powerlessness, and surrendered to accepting power.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. I find centering, and that was my next question. I practiced centering prayer many years ago, and just recently, I don't know, I'm having a deeper experience with centering prayer.
I facilitate a centering prayer gathering twice a month on the second and the fourth Wednesday. That's on my website.
Thank you.
And that's where you were coming from. I could resonate with it, and that's where I came from.
Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Perhaps we could pray the serenity prayer and bring it to a conclusion. Thank you so much for your participation. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Amen.